Rabbi Yitzchak said, a lie you're not allowed to say, but the truth you don't have to say. And that's what people get confused about. They think if I don't say, I'm being dishonest.
Welcome to Rebbi, I Have a Question, a podcast from Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya. I'm your host, Donna Margolis, and in each episode, I sit down with Rabbi Yitzchak Shurin to explore one question sent in by a student or an alumna, questions about family, relationships, identity, and the lifelong journey of becoming a Torah Jew. With over 4 decades of guiding students, Rabbi Shurin brings Torah wisdom from our sages, life experience, and the teachings of his grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal, to some of the most sensitive and personal issues we face. You may be surprised by what you hear. Let's begin. This is part 2 of our conversation about how to relate to your past after becoming religious or more religious. In our last episode, we talked about the internal experience, how we think and feel about who we were before we became religious. Today, we're looking at the interpersonal side. Should you talk about your past with the people in your current life? When is it helpful? When is it not helpful? What about friends, potential spouses? What about even with your spouse and your kids? So let's jump in. Hi, Rabbi Shurin.
Hi, Donna. How's it going?
Okay, it's good to be back.
It's good to have you back.
Just on a note about that, Rabbi Shurin, I think you and I both know that we've had tremendous feedback from this podcast. Yeah? You have
Correct,
that one?
yeah. I told you it's becoming my second full-time job.
Okay, good. Well, that shows that what you're saying is making people think, and they're
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So just for all the audience out there, we are getting wonderful follow-up questions. I am keeping track of all of them. And over time, please God, we hope to be able to address them. Now, let's jump in with what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So Rabbi Shurin, this is sort of a follow-up to last week. As I said before, last week, we had a very good conversation about how to relate to one's past, but there's a lot more to it, and we may need to even have another follow-up conversation or 3 or 4, okay? Sure. But for this week, let's start with this question that we got from many people after the last episode. So, should somebody who became more religious, a baalot teshuva, or somebody that became more religious or maybe went off a little bit and then came back on, right? These are all the category of people that we're talking about today. Right. So in your opinion, Rabbi, do you think that it's important for her to talk about her past to other people, or is it more important to just sort of keep it private?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me just start off by saying that at a certain point, I don't know when this happened in my career of teaching baalot teshuva, but at a certain point, there became a culture in the United States, and it's been overflowing to other places as well over the years, is that they feel that they have to be open and honest and put all the cards on the table, right? And otherwise, if they don't do that, they feel it's dishonest, okay? And that came from a culture because on the one hand, I think it's a good thing in the sense of people want to be honest, they want to be open. I think that's actually a good thing. It's not necessarily unhealthy, but I think they're confusing dishonesty with not telling you everything, which is not really true. I just want to say, I once heard from my grandfather in the name of Rabbi Shurin. My grandfather loved talking about the truth. That was, he always would say, Titein emet liYaakov, you know. But he said, Rabbi Shurin said, a lie you're not allowed to say, but the truth you don't have to say. Okay, and that's what people get confused about. They think if I don't say, I'm being dishonest. No, it's coming from a good place, but it's being misused, this concept of honesty. If you don't say everything, it doesn't mean you're dishonest, right? Except, of course, if it's something you need to say, right? If you need to say it, but where you don't have to say it, right? So you just, like you said, it's private. It's something in my past, right? And it's not, it's not something that everybody needs to know. But I want to add something over here on a psychological level. People are afraid in the Western world, the United States, other places, of repressing things, because repression is unhealthy. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, they're confusing repression with keeping things private. Repression is something that has been, it's a psychological trauma that you repress, and many times you don't even know about it, right? So that's not good. That's why we see therapists, to bring certain things out. And that's where you don't have to be so reserved. If your therapist, who knows that everything is going to be kept quiet in the room where they're sitting, right? You really should bring things out, and repression should come out over there. It should come up and out over there. I think that's very healthy. But in most cases, it's not repression. It's these past, ideas that we have, or past history that we have. And that past history are memories, but they're not necessarily so relevant to us right now. So why do you want to share them?
Mm-hmm. What if somebody asks you directly, though, like in a specific situation, your kids, or you're dating somebody and they ask you a specific question about your past? Do you have to tell them?
Okay, so over here, I would say I've had a lot of interaction with women who have had this challenge. Okay, over here, I would say that, first of all, it depends why they're asking. Okay. Some things a guy can ask a girl that really none of their business, right? So the person would really want to say to them, like, that's something personal. Why do you want to know about it? Right? So because you'd want to make, you want to make it clear that if there's, just curiosity, that's not something that people really need to know. If it's, why do I need to be given to your curiosity? In other words, the question would be, is why do you need to know about it, and why is it relevant to us? Okay. I'll tell you where this question comes up, even though it's a bit racy, but I have to bring it up. It came up many times where women were dating, especially from birth guys, but not always from birth guys, but especially those guys, where the guy obviously was he had never had intimacy or even had girlfriends in some of the cases. So he was basically a virgin, and he really wanted to know if his wife was, she's not his wife, but his girlfriend, or the woman he's dating, was. And I would always, when they would come to me and say, I think the guy is going to ask me, or he did ask me, right? I will say, and sometimes, by the way, I called the woman in the office when I saw things were getting serious with an FFB. I said, this issue might come up. Okay. And we have to think about how to handle it. Right. So if he just wants to know because he's obsessed with it, so I usually tell the woman, tell him to come and see me, because my experience has been that whether you're with a woman who's a virgin or not, and she had boyfriends and stuff like this, it doesn't really make much difference in a marriage. I don't have 1% statistic where it made a difference. The guy sometimes thinks it's going to make a difference, right? And he thinks it's relevant, right? But really, it's just a little bit like an obsession that he needs to know. It's more psychological than anything else, right? Sometimes he's a little bit nervous about the fact that he is not, he's not as much as we call it educated in that field as she is, and he feels as a man he won't be able to meet up to that standard. And I always say to him, I've had women who had a lot of boyfriends, and I've had cases where they got married and it didn't matter. The only thing that I get once in a while, I got this, is he didn't know what he was doing, but it didn't matter after they got married. That's what he said. He didn't know what he was doing, but it didn't matter. Right. So it really doesn't matter. So if we're talking about something that is personal like that, or let's say the woman was admitted, hospitalized at one point. Okay. So again, we want to know if it was the fact that she was hospitalized a few years ago, is it relevant today? Okay. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I joke about it when I say to some girls, I was also hospitalized. They took out my tonsils.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very relevant to actually tell Esther. I just want to let you know before we actually get the ring on the finger is that I was hospitalized and had my tonsils out. Okay, what else is new? Okay, so it really depends on whether what the fellow was asking is curiosity or relevant. If it's curiosity, the woman could say to him, that's a personal issue. Why do you want to go into that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So can you expand on that a little bit more, when a couple is actually married already, right? And going back to the first thing that you said, that we do live in this culture of authenticity, where in order to like really feel like you know somebody, you have to be authentic. And oftentimes there is, I agree with you, a mistaken understanding of what being authentic is. So
Right.
give us a little bit more about how a person can live with authenticity and integrity. How can we think about it in a proper hashkafic way that doesn't require us to go back into our past and feel that in order to be honest with even our friends, we make new friends, like we want them to really know us. So if they really know us, then, do they have to know about our past? How do we think about that
So
psychologically?
again, I want to just say that history is not necessarily relevant. If it's relevant, it's not history. It may have happened many years ago, but it's relevant today. That's where it really comes in. In other words, if a woman is bringing into a marriage, certain issues that she had, certain traumas she went through, right? Because it's going to be brought into the marriage, not its history, but it's going to be brought into the marriage. Then, of course, she does have to bring that up. And by the way, if the guy runs the other way, so be it. Because if he can't handle it, it was not a good thing for him to marry her, right? And this goes again with like questions of boyfriend's intimacy, questions of being hospitalized. If the guy gets really freaked out, I have had students, I'm just thinking about a certain one now, that was hospitalized in high school for psychological reasons, and it never came up again. We don't even know if it was the right thing to do that they did when the parents hospitalized. We don't even know if they needed to do that. And then she asked me, like, does she have to bring it up to the guy she's dating? And I said, not, you don't even have to bring it up to your husband, because all it's going to do is scare the guy, because he's going to start thinking who knows what. And I asked her, did anything like this ever come up again? And she said, absolutely not. So we do know cases where people make the wrong decision, and it's a one-shot deal, and it's not relevant anymore. So why would I bring certain things up to my spouse and just like sort of freak them out if it's not really relevant? If it is relevant, right, then of course, I'll give you an example. Again, it's, more on the, relationship side. There are women, and this is a big thing in America today, maybe other parts of the world, but especially America, where women on university campuses, my students who before they were frum, of course, they get drunk and then they're date raped. So the guy didn't meet them in the street and rape them, but they were involved with the guy and they were drunk, and the guy, they wanted to put a red line on what was going on, and the guy didn't go for it, But a lot of these women are traumatized afterwards. And in some cases, they have problems after that having intimacy with and it could be even their husbands. So that's something that has to be brought up. And sometimes I tell them to bring it up before the marriage and say to the friend. And again, I want to stress, if you're bringing this up, you have to be in a serious relationship. You're not going to bring it up on the second date, or I'm going to get really aggravated. I tell the women, why did you do that? Right? And a lot of times they did it because I got to be honest. I said, what do you mean be honest? I don't need the whole world to know your past, right? You have to bring it up when you know this is the guy. I don't say that, bring it up after marriage if you think it's relevant before the marriage, right? But you should bring it up, but you know that, number one, you're very serious about this guy. Number two, you got there's a lot of potential between you. There's a lot of potential, and you're very serious. It doesn't mean you're getting married tomorrow, or even getting engaged, but that's a time when you want to bring it up. But again, only if it's relevant. It's not like we're very serious and now I have to tell them everything about my life, right? No, you don't. Just like you don't have to tell him that you used to love to jump rope when you were in third grade, right? Because he'll wonder, like, why are you telling me that, right? Same thing over here. Even though these are much more serious things, but if they're not relevant, don't bring them up. If you feel they will come into the marriage, of course you have to bring them up beforehand. By the way, I want to tell you something interesting that I reminded myself. A woman said to me that the guy is going to ask me tomorrow if I ever had any intimate relationships. I know for a fact he was hinting to it. What do, Rabbi Shurin? I called up the chief rabbi of Jerusalem on the spot, okay, Rabbi Kulitz, Zichrono Livracha, and he was getting on a plane. He told me, I'm answering. I didn't know I'm getting on a plane. I said, it's a very serious question. I wouldn't bother the Rav. And he actually said to me, she could lie. Listen to that. She had, I think, one or two boyfriends, right? He said she could lie. Now, I don't know where he got it from because he was getting on a plane and he had to hang up, right? But he actually said she could lie. No, I never told them that. I tell them, if he asks, you shouldn't lie. But on the other hand, you should say, like, okay, why are you asking me that question? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? I've had a case where there was a woman who, well, like all the other women, but her parents were very conservative and she never had intimate relations before she was married. And when she started dating, I actually said to her, listen, if the guy asks you, right, if you ever had intimate relations, do me a favor and don't say no. Say, is that relevant? Now, he's going to think you did, right? But eventually you'll be able to say to him, oh, you thought I did, but I never had. But you should know that's not an appropriate question to ask. Mm-hmm. So I told her to do that in case he didn't ask. But she was dating a frum guy, so I was afraid of that. And I said, even though you never had relationships, and you should be proud of it in a sense, but it's very normal for our Western society to have relationships already in high school. And I would rather the guys not ask those questions, because don't ask the question. If it's relevant, I'll tell you about it. If I'm still hooked on a boyfriend, I will tell you about it. I'm not going to lie to you and have it, this guy in the back of my mind while I'm married to you. That's something that's inappropriate. You either need therapy for that, or you need to certainly talk it out.
I really like the line that you said earlier about if it's relevant, then it's not your past.
Right, exactly.
You said if it's relevant.
Exactly. You put it really well, Donna. Yeah. If it's relevant, it's not your past. It's the present.
Right. Interesting.
By the way, let me just say, I don't like when couples bring up history either. In general, we'll talk about that maybe in a different podcast, but don't bring up history, meaning, you're just like your dad. That's really biology too. Or, you did this 6 years ago to me, and now you're doing it again. History is not helpful, okay? Especially when it's not relevant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. So one of the other things that came up a lot from our students is the question about children, right?
Oh, yeah.
How much do we let on to the kids about the way that we grew up? And I can say from my own friends and people that I know over the years, that there are some that are very, let's say they pretend, but in a way they share so little that their kids don't really know that they grew up perhaps very differently from how they're raising their own kids. And then I have other people that I know that, are forever talking about the things that they used to do and the clothes that they used to wear and the things that were in their past. So what's the healthy balance and like what's the proper way to relate to kids in that way?
America has this idea, Donna, what's called sharing, which sounds very, very positive, right? And again, it can be. Sharing things is very positive. But again, you have to know what's healthy to share and what's not healthy to share. You don't have to share everything, about, let's say, your past, even certainly with your kids. Again, especially, we have to really make sure that the kid is not going to lose respect for the parent. That's very important. So you always have to think, okay, why do I want to share this with my child? It's just because I have memories about it. That's why I want to share it. I have even nice memories about it. That's not enough, Donna. You have to know that it can be beneficial. So I'll give you examples. When kids are going through, not usually younger kids, but teenage kids are going through really difficult times, and they're struggling, let's say, with their Judaism or struggling with sexuality, even if it's not their Judaism, but struggling with sexuality. That's a good time when you might want to share. He'll want to know, how did you deal with it? Some boys want to know about that. How did you deal with the Yetzer Hara? I was in yeshiva. How do you so if I think there's certain things that are beneficial, I certainly will share it with my kids. I think that's when I feel it's beneficial. That's the time to really share, because the child is struggling. Just to tell the child, I like this. I really like this rock song that I'd like you to hear, right? Or I've had students, one particular I'm thinking about, who wants to share movies with their kids because they really remember very, there's a lot of beautiful memories about this, the Wizard of Oz, let's say, right? I'm not so sure you necessarily have to have your kids watch the Wizard of Oz because you have great memories about it, right? I think if you think it'll be beneficial and you want to show them how certain movies have messages, because I think the Wizard of Oz does have very important messages, by the way. But if that's the reason, so then I could see it, right? Seeing a movie like Exodus, it has a tremendous message that's very relevant today. So I could see sharing that. But just things, that I forget the word that they use, just like these fond memories that I have.
Nostalgia.
That's exactly the word. They've got it, right? I don't think it automatically is a mitzvah to share nostalgia. It's, I'll give you an example. I never shared with my kids how much I love the Catskill Mountains. But when Nechama went to the Catskill Mountains and she worked there and she saw how beautiful it was, and she came to tell me, so then I shared with her, my experience was very similar to hers. And it was very important that she heard that. For a lot of different reasons, it was very important that she heard that.
Why didn't you want to tell them?
So it wasn't a question of wanting or not wanting. It was really just, would it be beneficial for me to tell them? Like, what if they're going to gain something from it? I certainly will share it, right? But if I didn't think that they would, it wouldn't make a difference to them. So I'm not so sure why. What is the point? Again, it could even be that, they would feel good that I felt good about the Catskill Mountains. That could be a reason also, but I didn't really see it until they actually experienced it, right? And they saw what it was, right? That I felt it could even relate to the way I felt about it. Growing up in Brooklyn, in hot Brooklyn, in the city, and then going to the Catskill Mountains, what kind of relief it was and the change of pace it was for me. I had to feel it was relevant. And then I really shared it, and they really got a lot out of it. When they said to me, we want to see where you grew up, which of course, you need a tank to go there. It makes Milwaukee, I think, look like the Five Towns or Beverly Hills. Okay. So you understand where I grew up. I didn't let them out of the car. They wanted to knock on the front door to say they want to see the house, the house where my dad grew up. I didn't let them out of the car. Okay. But they said they wanted to see it. So I said, why do you want to see it? So they said to me, we'd like to get a better impression of what your childhood was like. So I said, okay. And we were, in New York, and the Hummer was driving. So I said, okay, let's drive over. I think there were a few kids in the car. And I shared with them my home. And then I drove them. They drove me to where my school was, my elementary school, that Rabbi Farber went to as well. We spoke about that. And I enjoyed it very much. Reminiscing was, really, really very touching for me. And it still is today when I think about it by myself. But I feel in order to draw a line, it has to be really relevant. In some way, your kids are going to get something out of it, right?
So when a kid, let's say, because I think comes up for people a lot. Let's say a kid is struggling, like you mentioned before.
Right.
And they know that the parents didn't have to struggle with this thing. They have a taiva for non-kosher food, and they know the parents grew up going to restaurants with their families and eating, who knows what. So because maybe the parents told them. So, when a kid challenges you and says, well, why are you making me do this? You didn't do it when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm. Right. So look, I think there's your opportunity. In other words, the person who had cheeseburgers has an opportunity that, I can't do. They can't send you to Rabbi Shurin for that, but they have an opportunity to say to you, listen, I grew up with that. And I could tell you, how difficult it is, number one, right? I have a student of Chappelle's from many, many years ago who said, Rabbi Shurin, I'm frum for 20 years. And I still can't go past that hamburger joint now because I feel the taiva, right? So on one hand, I feel the baalot teshuva when the child is struggling, right? It could be very helpful, okay? Because they know you could relate. When the child's not struggling, to create a struggle is not wise, okay? So I really would rather, wait for the time when you could really be helpful for the child rather than sharing it when the child might lose respect for you, right? By the way, I would say that if you want to share something which is a personal past with your child, it's best to speak to somebody else before that. If it's a big thing, like let's say your kids are on drugs and you took drugs, which was very prevalent in the United States starting the 1970s or 60s already. And I think today it's unfortunately everywhere. People just smoke pot, once a week, or there are from people smoke it every Rosh Chodesh. I mean, it's like so common, unfortunately, today. Ramosh Feisty has a teshuva where he doesn't love it, but I think it's good when you want to share something personal to first speak to a therapist or a Rebbitzin. If it's a woman and it's a Rebbitzin, I would speak to them, not that necessarily because they're the biggest experts, but you want to get feedback from somebody like who's a professional. If it's going to be something that may shock the child, like intimacy relationships or something, you may not want to share that before you speak to somebody professionally, like a therapist, who says, is it worthwhile to do that or not? I know we're very big on being very open in the therapy world as well, but I think a good solid therapist knows where to draw the lines of, do we want the kid to, react in a traumatic way because they know you've had these relationships. So I would be very careful before I share to make sure, number one, the kid will not lose respect. Number two, I think I can gain something by sharing it, right? Which maybe somebody else can't, help the child, but I can because I'm the parent, I'm the mom, I'm the dad, and I could really help the child through something like that. And I've had my own kids who are from birthers, and we're from birthers, ask me questions that some people would blush at, and I made sure not to blush at, because, and even though some of the things I didn't have in my life, right, but I was able to share enough of what I went through to help them deal with the challenge, meaning, dad also had the challenge in a certain way, and he overcame it, and it's overcomable, because a lot of times we feel like, I really can't overcome this, right? But it's not, most of the time, it's not really true. And I think that's where sharing could be extremely helpful. But it's not automatic, Donna. It's not automatic that you just share your life with the child. And by the way, sometimes it goes way over the red line when you're sharing your relationship with your husband, with your child, right? Maybe there's problems in the marriage. That absolutely is not permitted on any level. I forget what they call it in psychology when your daughter becomes your therapist, right? Or your son becomes the dad's therapist. I find it more with women than with men. And all of a sudden, this child is in the middle of, something going on, either in their mom's past or in the mom's present. It's not a healthy thing. You got to keep that for the professional, for nobody else.
For the what?
Professional. Yeah, professional. You should, don't get your kids involved in stuff like that, because, there's so many different reasons why you can't get them involved in this,
Well, I think to rehash or not rehash, but just repeat what you said, to summarize, it sounds like sharing can be a good thing when, number one, it's not going to cause your kids to lose respect for you. And
right.
two, when you think that there's something that they can gain from what you're going to share.
Exactly. That's perfectly put. I want to add something else, in sort of in a general way. Kids want their parents, especially in the religious world, to be able to say, my dad or mom is really normal. And that could be a reason for sharing. In other words, like, whatever it is in your past, like, you used to listen to rock music, or, you're involved in, I don't know, going to ball games and teams, and you love the Yankees, whatever it is, you want your parents to think that you're normal. And if the kids don't think the parents are normal, they have a hard time relating. And a lot of times, baalot teshuva specifically don't share these types of things because they don't want the kids to know that they loved sports, or they loved secular music, or, whatever it is that they really loved, that not even necessarily prohibited, but, my child is such a ben Torah, I don't want them to know. But sometimes the child's thinking, are my dad and mom really normal? And if they're not normal, and I am, how can I relate to them? And that could be a problematic thing when the child is going through tough times. It says, I can't share this with my parents because they're not normal Jews. They're these tzaddikim, and I can't share with them. I always wanted my kids to think that, your dad is normal. And by the way, Rabbi Yaakov was very, very into this. Rabbi Yaakov was very into showing, how he was a normal kid. And, again, he was Eastern European, so, he wasn't playing baseball. But he got the kids who were playing baseball in Torah Vadas to feel that that's okay. It's normal to be a kid, right? And Rabbi Yaakov was very big in that thing. Medaf zayin a normale mensch. He used to always say it. Medaf zayin a normale mensch. You have to be a normal person. And he used to say it about baalot teshuva. He used to say to me, Medaf machen a normale baalot teshuva. They were normal before they were frum. They have to remain normal after they were frum. I want to share with you one last thing with Rabbi Yaakov, something very personal. I did a master's degree in guidance and counseling. Okay. And part of it was I had to go into schools. I don't remember the word they use now. You either had to write a master's thesis or go into schools and write up reports about kids. And of course, I went into yeshivas. Okay. And I went into my uncle's yeshiva in the 5 towns, South Shore. And they actually, I was free of charge, so they actually hired me as like sort of a counselor, because in those days they didn't really have counselors in school, but they said, look, this guy is free, right? It turned out that I had a student that they sent to me who was a child of a professor I had in psychology. Isn't that interesting? The father was a brilliant guy. I loved him. He was a therapist and a professor. And the son, I put two and two together, and he was, and I met Rabbi Yaakov at a different point months later, and I told Rabbi Yaakov about it. I said, look, he's a therapist's child. His father is a PhD in psychology, and he's got certain issues. So my grandfather said to me in Yiddish, he said, "Du meinst dich, ich hab gewen a normale Kind? Do you think I was a normal child?" And I was like shocked when he said this. He says, when I came to Slobodka, I was not normal.
Wow.
He said this, and he said, and if not for the altar of Slobodka, I don't know what would have been with me. And he started giving me examples of things he reacted in law sort of in a normal way. Now, it wasn't the same things we have today, but he had a chavruta who he didn't like learning with. So he didn't know how to tell him, I don't want to be a chavruta, because the guy was 3 years older than him. Don't forget, Rabbi Yaakov was an ingenious kid. So he came to Slobodka, he was 15 and a half. He learned with the guy who was 18 and a half. So he didn't know how to tell him, guy was a chashuva guy in Slobodka, that it's not going well. So he stopped learning. He started battling in the yeshiva. So he says, is that normal? He says, is that normal? So he said, it doesn't sound normal. So he says that, yeah, but I wasn't normal. But over the years, I had different things that I had to work out, and the altar helped me work this out, So, he shared this with me, and I could see that when he shared it with me is how important it was to become normal. And geniuses many times don't become normal. They're geniuses, but they can't. Life doesn't go well with them. And he wanted to show me, yes, the Alter Slobodka, who was a psychologist without the degree, right? He made me normal, Rabbi Aaron Kotler normal. He made us normal kids, which was great, And the world relates so much better when a Rav throws out something, whether he's in yeshiva, somewhere, and the Rav throws out something to make the kid feel like, you know what? It's not something I have to be embarrassed about. It's not something I have to be ashamed about, right? My Rav is just like that. Rav Scheinberg, when he threw out, it happened more than once when someone came from New York to what's the name of his yeshiva? I don't remember the name of the yeshiva in Mattersdorf, and Torah, right? So he would interview the guy, and at the end of the interview, he'd say, "Look, how are the Yankees doing?" And the guy would like light up, because the guy wasn't going to tell Rav Scheinberg that he loves the Yankees and he knows everyone's average on the team, right? But it just like broke a certain ice. And by the way, Rav Scheinberg said it more than once that I wasn't asking him to make him feel okay. I was asking because I really remember the Yankees in a very fond way, So that, of course, you have to share because it's very helpful for the person you're sharing it with.
Beautiful. That's a wonderful story to end with, Rabbi. Thank you so much. Thank you for the sensitive and insightful guidance. And, these questions today, they weren't just theoretical, they were real and personal. And your answers gave us all, I'm sure, a lot to think about.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing me to share.
If you have a question for a future episode and you want to send it our way, you can email us at questions@darcheinoam.org. That's questions@darcheinoam.org. Rebbi, I Have a Question is a podcast from Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya. See you next time.
Take care, guys.